All right, guys, I'm going to talk about the potential differences in judging between the USA shows and the European shows for bikini in the Ifbb Pro League. Um, and, I want to talk about, I've got some examples on the screen. Obviously, I'll run through those. It's a common thing. A lot of ladies are concerned that if they compete in Europe, they'll be judged differently, or they don't have the physiques that they like in Europe. Um, and whilst there is a vast or a relatively obvious difference in the winners between Europe and the USA in some shows, I want to run through what I'm seeing, um, and why I believe the judging is relatively consistent. Actually, I feel like it's very consistent, and why it comes down to who is on stage. So I'll jump straight into it because what I see, and this is obviously what I saw doing the shows last year, being there in person as well, seeing the ladies backstage, being at the Olympia, seeing them backstage, working with pros, and just sort of generally having a good eye for bikini. I kind of wanted to share this because I feel like it may help uh, with show choice, and just like opening up the options. Don't be afraid to compete in Europe. But anyway, I'll go through why. Okay. Now, this was the Prague Pro. Okay. Valeria won this, and she's obviously way too lean, in my opinion. She's got quite striations. You can see that very clearly. She's very X-framey. In the back, it's like very obvious tie-ins, hamstring definition. Her calves are striated. It's just far too lean for bikini, in my opinion. And I know everyone agrees with this. And so when she wins a show like the Prague Pro, it's a big show, arguably one of the biggest shows in Europe. This sends a message to, I guess the whole industry where this is the standard. And it's actually not the standard, and I'm going to go through why. Now, obviously, when you look at the girls who came second and third, the girl that's most like Valeria is Natalie. She's just quite almost as lean. She doesn't have the density in the quads to have the striations, but you can see the definition and the cuts. The same on this back leg. She's just as lean as Valeria. She's just lacking the density, which makes her look not as full as Valeria, even though they have similar conditioning. So that adds to the argument that that's what they're looking for in Europe. But it's actually, when you look at the lineup, and you can kind of see here with Amy, Amy's just missed the mark. She's not full. She's a little flat. She's not got the same density in the shape in the front pose. In the back pose, it's the same. She's arguably as lean in the hamstrings, just doesn't have the fullness in the glutes. And that's why, if she was full, if she was on point, she would beat Valeria on this day, right? Now, the argument to that, obviously, is that she's won other shows in Europe. She's done very well in other shows in Europe. But this is the thing, is that these three girls were just simply the best in terms of who brought the criteria based on who else was on stage. There was no one else throughout the rest of the lineup that was in a position to challenge Valeria for her shape and her structure and her posing and all of the things that they judge, right? And so the only thing that really lets Valeria down is her conditioning. Now, obviously, in some cases, this can be enough for her to not place, and I can go through why. If we move across to the USA show here, this is a show that she came third in, Valeria, and you can see her there. Now, this is a show that Ash K actually won. I'm not sure of the girl who came second. Let me just check that. That is Sierra. And then Valeria third, and then I believe that is Yum fourth. And the reason why I've got fourth there is I wanted to show you who Valeria was beating in this show. So obviously I'll work through the list here. We've got Amy in first there. Perfect bikini in my opinion. The right amount of muscle. It's not overly X-frame. It's perfect hourglass structure. balanced top to bottom. She's not got etched in tie-ins or striations or definition or cuts on her legs. Her midsection's tight and flat. She's not too full that she's spilled over, but she's super full enough to be, you can see in the back pose, it's balanced top to bottom. She's not really missing anything. If anything, I would like to see a little bit of glute roundness in the front pose, but, out of that lineup, she easily wins that. And that's why she's so successful, is because her shape and her structure and her conditioning are always perfect bikini. Obviously everyone can do with a little bit more fullness, but it's just a matter of balancing that and not spilling. Who is this? Sierra. Sierra comes second here and beats Valeria, I believe, due to the conditioning, right? You can still see Valeria here with her quad striations. It's something that's consistent in most of her shows. Now, obviously, the lighting's different, so the tan's a little bit off on all of them, but, the shape and the structure in Valeria is fantastic. She's just a little bit too dense and lean in the legs. And I'll go through what happens when they fill her up as well. But then you can see how she's beaten Yum here, who doesn't have as much conditioning. So you could say, okay, arguably conditioning is better, not being so conditioned is better, but she didn't beat Valeria because Valeria has a better shape and structure, better density, better size, and better balance, right? So Yum's amazing, but not quite as balanced in the rear pose. It's like sort of her hamstrings and quads kind of overpower the glutes in the back pose. So it looks like the glutes are lacking a little bit, even though she has great glutes. She just needs to downsize or just pose differently in the rear pose, or at least be a little bit fuller and slightly leaner at the same time, to bring out that balance. Because in the rear pose, it's not lacking. It's lacking balance top to bottom, right? And so this is where in Europe, Valeria wins with shape, structure, proportion, size, all of these things. And then she goes into a show in the US where she's coming up against girls with just as good shape and structure, just as good balance, and then is being beaten because her condition is too hard, right? This girl here, Sierra, arguably not as good, well put together. Like she's lacking a little bit of glutes. I don't personally like the hair where you can see a lot of the lats and everything. If that was covered, it would be a lot better. But arguably not as sort of optimal for bikini in that rear pose. But beats Valeria because her condition isn't as hard. And so, when that is a decision that they have to make, the judges, it doesn't matter whether they're in Europe or in the USA, they're going to go for someone with just as good structure, maybe not as good development and shape, but similar to the winner in terms of conditioning. And maybe her posing and presentation was better than Valeria's or on par. And so in that situation, they go for someone who has nailed the criteria for nailed the conditioning criteria for bikini. So it's interesting because almost a similar package to Prague here gives her a third place against girls who aren't as conditioned. And so that's where a lot of people get confused, because they're like, well, why is Sierra beating her here? Is it just because of conditioning? Well, no, there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. And then if we move along, this is just going to add to my point here. We move to another USA show. This is probably arguably one of the better shows in the US, the New York Pro. You often see girls who top 5 in the Olympia winning these shows. And so this is really like a standard for conditioning and fullness. And we move along here. It's got Amy. We got Amy in first. Hang on, the list is here. Amy first, Sharon second, Huen in third, and then Valeria in fifth. And the reason why I'm using Valeria is because she's often the girl who wins, the bigger shows in Europe. And so that's where a lot of people say, oh, that's what they're looking for in Europe, when realistically, it's just because she has the better shape. And if these girls were to go and compete in Europe, she wouldn't win. If Amy did Europe, she would win Europe. If they turned up like this in this, and she was on that stage, she would win that show. Same with Sharon and possibly even Huen, right? Huen. So this is the point here. If we move along here, I'll talk about why she's placing, and obviously Valeria is a little bit fuller here. I believe she worked with a different coach for this show. They brought her in really, really full. But the problem with Valeria when she's coming in full is she's just way too oversized. She's overpowered in the legs. Her quads and her hamstrings in these back poses and the front poses. It's just so overpowering. Like this quad in the back here, it's so dense, so muscular. So she almost has to be either downsized, like less muscle, or she has to come in, or she has to just change her training so that this density isn't here and the fullness. If she has the fullness without this density, then she will be equal. If you look along in terms of Amy and Sharon here, similar fullness, similar size, but there's more development on the glutes. Your eyes aren't your eyes aren't going straight to the quads. Same with the delts. There's nice cap, there's nice roundness, but it's not too much where you see Valeria just really pop in there. It just looks too much on Valeria, right? So you can't say that being fuller is the solution for her because she's come in fuller and not placed as well as she has in these other shows, right? So you wouldn't say then that being leaner is the solution either because she didn't win the show when she was in the same condition as she did when she won Prague. It's just simply who's in the lineup. These girls often don't travel over to Europe because they just don't need to. There's so many shows in USA that they just don't need to go and do European shows to qualify for Olympia. If they can win a show in the US, why would they go over to the Europe shows? And if I talk about this lineup, like Amy, same sort of concept as Ashkay, just amazing bikini structure, not too much X-frame, not too much lats, nice amount of muscle in the shoulders, roundness, amazing glute roundness in the front pose. I believe she's stronger than Amy in this pose. If you compare these two photos, I think, not Amy, Ash. I think Ash was much stronger at the Olympia. I don't have those photos here. But yeah, you can see that really, really great structure. She beats Sharon here just because of the density and the balance, and also in the rear pose. Amy's rear pose is really dominant. And then we move along here, like the fullness is dominant in the glutes. There's a certain amount of balance in the top and bottom, and it's just proportioned. As we move along into third, Huen, is that Huen? Yeah. Not as much balance in the upper, a little bit flat and less roundness compared to the top two, but she's in a better condition and not as sort of oversized as Valeria is. Valeria kind of loses that roundness in the glutes because it's so round, but she just loses that shape in proportion to her legs because her legs are so big here when she's full. So that's where, when you're full, when you're the right amount of fullness for bikini, you have to have the right shape, and that means you have to have the training on point and not have the crazy density that she has, because as soon as you fill up a muscle like that, it just gets huge. It just looks way bigger. And that's why you see, look along here, like my eyes don't go to anyone's quads, and then as soon as we get here, it's like, bam, there's striations, crazy roundness in the delts, crazy width. It's just not bikini when she's that full. She's more bikini when she's leaner, but the problem is her condition is the problem, right? Her condition is not bikini when she is leaner, right? So hopefully you can see that, through that, like it's just one example. But the problem isn't the judging. The problem is who's in the lineup and who are they judging, right? Who's third, who's fifth, who's sixth, not who's winning, because they can only judge who's there based on, all of the criteria, not just condition. It's not just a conditioning game. It's not just a fullness game. It's a full package game. And if in Europe one thing that's letting Valeria down is her striated quads, it's not necessarily enough to place her last or fifth or whatever it is when she has superior everything else. Okay? And one more point to back this up. We've got this Spain show. I think this is a Nutriyama show. And the reason why I'm showing this is because we've got Evie, who's, who competes in the US. She wins shows over there as well. And she's come over to do this show and she's won, right? It's not someone who's leaner. Like you can see here, all of these girls, this is Chantel and Kerry. So Chantel in second and Kerry in third. Both Chantel and Kerry have won pro shows in the Europe circuit. So arguably very strong competitors, similar to Valeria. But Evie wins here because of her balance, proportion, shape, condition, package altogether. Like you look along in this rear pose, Chantel's way leaner than the tie-in's way sharper. You know, it's not as full. It's a little bit out of proportion in comparison to her glutes and quads. She's got a lot of flare going on in her quads. Whereas Evie, it's just so balanced top to bottom. The glutes and hamstrings, quads, all balanced. Same in the front pose. Not too much X frame, just enough to be hourglass. Really nice pop and roundness in the front. These two girls, Kerry and Chantel, have really, really capped delts. You know, it just takes away that femininity. And it's the same as what you see in Valeria. And so, arguably, these two girls in a fuller condition would be, you know, potentially pushing her for the first place here. And that's why, you know, as soon as she's not here, the placings are different. As soon as Evie's not here. Same in the rear pose for Kerry and Chantel. I already said that. Just too much conditioning, too much hardness, not as balanced in, they both could be fuller in the glutes to balance out the hamstrings and quads, and just ease off on the shoulders a little bit, just to be more sort of top to bottom balanced, less masculine in those poses. But it's just a good example of girls that win European shows, who aren't consistently winning shows. As soon as there's someone who nails the criteria more so for their physique, you know, who often does win shows in the US circuit as well. So hopefully from this, guys, you can see, you know, it's not necessarily different judging, and I wouldn't focus on that being the issue, right? I would be focusing on bringing the bikini criteria. Like if I was to help Valeria here, I'd be watching her training. Why is her quad so dense and hard and striated? What is she doing in the gym to create this density? Because I like this fullness. She looks fantastic here. She's just got too much muscle, right? So we need to downsize a little bit and bring the same conditioning. And she's going to be very hard to beat. You know, she's got a great structure, amazing. That's why she does have the ability to win the European shows in this condition, because no one can beat her on structure and shape. And equally so, like these girls over here, as soon as Evie's not there, they're winning shows, you know, because of the fact that they are so superior in structure. They're just a little bit too lean sometimes, and then also just not got the same fullness that Evie has in those poses. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to review, and see you all soon.